Well, hey there, and welcome back to Heimler's History. Now, we've been going through Unit 7 of the AP U.S. History curriculum, and in this video, we're going to look at American foreign policy between both world wars. So, if you're ready to get them brain cows milked with semi-isolationist fervor, then let's get to it. So let's focus this effort with our learning objective, and it's this. Explain the similarities and differences in attitudes about the nation's proper role in the world. So after the end of World War I, American foreign policy largely slid into isolationism. This just means that Americans had had their fill of European entanglement in the Great War, and we just needed some me time for a while. And the fact that Americans wanted that on the whole is evidenced by their choice of president in 1920, Warren G. Harding, who ran on the campaign promise of a return to normalcy, saying, "America's present need is not heroics but healing, not nostrums but normalcy, not revolution but restoration, not submergence in internationality but sustainment in triumphant nationality." Now, let me illustrate the outcome of this desire for isolationism in terms of foreign policy. First was the increase of tariffs, which again are taxes on imported goods. In 1922, the Fordney-McCumber Act raised tariffs dramatically, and then in 1930, Congress passed the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which drove them up even more. Now remember, when a protective tariff like this is enacted, it makes foreign goods more expensive, and thus people are more likely to buy domestically made goods. The flip side is that international trade decreases. Remember, we just needed some me time. Another example of isolationist foreign policy was the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Essentially, this was just a pact signed among 63 nations, the United States included, which tried to make war illegal, or at least renounce war in principle. Aw, that's cute. However, the pact was negotiated and signed outside the authority of the League of Nations, so it was impossible to enforce, and thus it was basically useless. So here again we see America using foreign policy in order to keep themselves clear of international entanglements, in this case another international war. But beginning in the 1930s, U.S. isolationism became harder and harder to maintain. Many Americans were concerned about the rise of fascist and totalitarian governments in Europe. In Italy, Benito Mussolini was the face of the rising fascist party. In Germany, Adolf Hitler took control in the name of the Nazi Party. Japan too hopped on the militaristic authoritarian train, and all these dictatorial governments became aggressors in their respective spheres, and that made Americans a little twitchy, but not twitchy enough to get involved. Americans watched as Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931. Then they watched as Germany occupied the Rhineland in 1936, then Austria in 1937, then Czechoslovakia in 1938. They watched as Italy took over Ethiopia in 1936, and all these developments troubled Americans, but to our isolationist tendencies, we stuck. And all of these aggressive actions came to a head in September of 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland and World War II officially began. But still, many American policymakers argued for neutrality. Isolationists pointed out that over 100,000 Americans had lost their lives the last time we got involved in a European war, namely World War I, and still the world was not safe for democracy as Woodrow Wilson had promised. And then adding evidence to the isolationist case was the Senate's Nye Committee, which presented unflattering evidence that certain American corporations had made a metric buttload of profit off of America's involvement in World War I. And that suggested that perhaps the pursuit of profits from these companies had led us into war in the first place. On the other side of the debate were the interventionists, who argued that it was foolish to isolate ourselves from the developments in Europe. The idea of isolationism stretched all the way back to the presidency of George Washington, and one of the main arguments for the isolation of America was the Atlantic Ocean. Like, it's so big, it's so far removed from Europe, we have a buffer. But interventionists argue that the bigness of the Atlantic Ocean as a buffer was no longer arguable in the age of submarines and airplanes. Europeans could bring this war to the American shores in a matter of days. They argued that if Britain was defeated, there would be nothing stopping Hitler and the rest of his authoritarian cronies from bringing the war to America. And here's where we get to President Franklin D. Roosevelt's attitude towards the war, and I would call him sort of like an intervening isolationist. He was deeply sympathetic to Britain's cause and thought that U.S. involvement in the war was proper, but he didn't have the support of the largely isolationist American public. So he led America to get involved in the war without appearing to be involved in the war. Let me explain. Roosevelt began gradually giving aid to the Allies, most notably to Great Britain. First was the Cash and Carry program, and under this program, Roosevelt persuaded Congress to pass a looser Neutrality Act that allowed any belligerent in the war to purchase armaments from the U.S. as long as they paid cash and used their own ships to transport them. And since Britain effectively controlled the seas, this policy was actually there to aid Britain. Then at the point when Britain was running dangerously low on cash to continue these payments, Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill worked out the Destroyers for Bases program. Under this deal, the U.S. exchanged American destroyers for land rights on various British possessions. And then finally in 1941 came the Lend-Lease Act, which allowed Britain to obtain arms that they needed from the U.S. on credit. So technically, the United States was neutral in all of this, but nobody was fooled when it came to where America's loyalties lay. Clearly, they were on the side of Britain and the Allied powers. But Every hope of continued isolationism was destroyed on the morning of December 7th, 1941. On that morning, Japanese planes flew over Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Hawaii and unleashed terrible destruction on it. And when the smoke cleared and the fires had died, over 2,400 Americans had died in the attack. And that evening, Roosevelt addressed Congress and asked for a declaration of war against Japan, and upon granting it, Hitler declared war on America, and now America was in the war, baby. Alright, thanks for watching. There are more videos right here on Unit 7, and if you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then click right here and grab a review packet. If this video helped you at all and you want to send me the signal to keep on making them, well then that's what the subscribe button is for. Heimler out.